Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston, and if this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, playing, and production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that you would be into, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. And today we're taking a look at the new Benson and Deep Sea Diver Fuzz Echo. This new signature pedal from Benson and Deep Sea Diver is a really interesting approach to the signature pedal idea. Because in my experience, whether it's guitars, pedals, or plugins, signature gear tends to try to ride this line between being specific enough to be identifiably the artist's idea, while also being mass appeal enough to be able to be used by people who aren't seeking to emulate the artist it is named for. And in my experience so far, the Deep Sea Diver Fuzz Echo really doesn't concern itself too much with the latter. This isn't to say that plugging this thing in will automatically make you sound like Jessica, no matter what your settings are, because all gear can be bent to the will of the user. But this is a really interesting approach where you have a bunch of kind of controls here that are inextricably tied to one another. So let's blow this apart and kind of talk about what it theoretically is made up of, and then we'll get into why it is so intractable from one another that you might as well look at this as one effect and not two effects in one. So obviously this is a fuzz echo, and so you can assume that this thing has both an echo and a fuzz. And great news, you would be correct. If you're familiar with any of Benson's previous pedal work, you will notice some familiar territory here. The fuzz side of this device is volume, gate, and bias. It's a silicone transistor-based Mark 1.5, Mark II kind of mashed together amalgamation of those two fuzz ideas, and then kind of tweaked and modified to do the zippery, splattery, gated thing, as well as much more wide open and woolly sounds. Again, these are things that we have heard in various other flavors from Benson in the past. And the other half of this pedal is going to be a 3-knob echo. You have your echo mix, your feedback, and your rate. It lives kind of very aggressively in a more slapbacky area for a lot of the twist of the knob, getting up to just shy of a second or so of delay at the most extreme side of things. Never really offering much in the way of white noise or clock noise when you really max it out, because there is no overclocking happening on this particular echo. Because this is a PT2399 based delay, this is going to have similar but not identical flavors to the Benson delay from last year. And so right here, I want to point out, here's the benefit to those two things. These are flavors of effect that Benson has shown a propensity for, the ability to execute on really well. I have raved and used a ton the Benson delay since its release. The overclocking side of it was probably my favorite side of that pedal, but I remarked on a lot in my video how good both halves of the Benson delay were. Everything below noon were these really great conventional sounds, and everything above noon were these really snowy lo-fi textures that I really love. And excluding that snowy lo-fi stuff from this pedal is a good decision, because the delay goes into the fuzz. And that's what makes this such an interesting device, is you are running an echo that has a mix control that can go louder than your dry signal into the front of what can be dialed to be more of a high headroom treble booster, but what can also be dialed to be the most kind of chaotic, gated and or woolly fuzz silicone monstrosity that you want it to be. And as you heard on that intro, there's a lot of really interesting texture that comes from that. Running a delay, even a non-super modulated or creative delay, but a pretty straightforward delay like this with just a little bit of modulation into a fuzz, gives you a whole wealth of textures that you don't get the other way around. That intro track, we didn't use a pedal board. We plugged my guitars directly into this, directly into my Benson Monarch. The only other effect being used in that signal chain was some spring reverb from the amp itself, but we are not adding any additional delays, modulation, or any other kind of real pedal board trickery to make the sounds, the textures, the spacey nonsense happening other than this device. And what's really cool there is you can get some really great angular rock and roll and post-hardcore sounds out of this thing. You can also use this to pull full-on shoegaze textures, kind of more conventional silky fuzz textures, or some almost clean delay sounds with kind of the fuzz configured to be more of that treble booster thing. For being as kind of intractable, like I said, as it is, a delay running into a fuzz, you can actually coax a lot of cool textures, both in terms of fuzz, echo, and the combination of the two, out of this device. Having said that, there is no actual way to turn off either of these effects. They are both always on, and all you can really do is kind of turn that fuzz into more of a clean boost, treble boost thing, or take that delay mix to 0. And it's worth noting that because that delay is always present, even when the mix is at minimum, if you set it to self-oscillate and just run away, even at minimum, it's still going to be present in the circuit, and you will actually get those oscillations happening even with mix at minimum. Now, obviously, there is a very easy solution there, which is to not have your feedback set to run away if you're not using the echo. This is not a hard solution, but it is indicative of the ethos in which this pedal came to be. These two effects are designed to live in tandem mostly all the time in this thing. You obviously can do a lot more to minimize the effect of the echo than you can the fuzz, but this thing is at its best when you're using both as a really interesting and creative texture machine. And it's worth noting, it does sound good on a lot of instruments and not just guitar. We are going to demo it out on guitar kind of moving forward here, but you heard on that intro that it also sounds really goddamn good on synthesizers, and I'm a fan of pedals with constraints. I don't love generally a piece of gear that is all things to all people. I like specificity when building a board. It's the reason that I reach for certain things. It's the reason I reach for specific eras of a certain device. A previous generation of a pedal that had less features, but the workflow of the features or a specific sound can be desirable, and those limitations can also drive better creativity. So is the Deep Sea Diver Fuzz Echo all things to all people? By no means. Is it just for fans of Jessica's work? Also, by no means. This is a good point to tip my hand and say, I'm not super familiar with her work. I am familiar with her in the guitar space. I've heard a couple of songs. But if you had handed me this pedal in isolation and had me guess who it was designed for, I don't think I would have been able to tell you. And I have found a ton of great use cases for it for my sounds. And so let's go ahead, plug it back into our amplifier and put it through its paces and explore a shockingly wide array of sounds from a seemingly very specific idea. So as always, before we get into our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and the context we're working in. I am playing my Bunting Melody Queen T directly into the Deep Sea Diver Fuzz Echo into the Benson Monarch Plus. We are running out to a Universal Audio aux box for cabinets and then into the Warm Audio 273 preamp. This is what our clean tone sounds like. And as we get into the Fuzz Echo, I want to go ahead and divide it up into two pretty distinct parts before combining them. And that is, of course, going to be the fuzz side with your gate and bias and your volume control. And then we'll take a look at the echo side and then kind of put them together, because you can't actually like fully extract one from the other entirely. We're going to kind of go to a very as clean as it gets treble sound, like treble booster sound when we get into the delay at the outset, and then we'll quickly let it all get chaotic. Let's start off with the fuzz, all knobs at noon for the fuzz side of the circuit. So as you can tell, there's no conventional gain or tone control on this fuzz, but instead you are able to kind of coax out different gain levels, textures and even some EQ tweaks by playing with the balance between those two controls. We're not going to go one after the other because that's not really how they interact, but rather you can kind of think of it as the body of the fuzz with the bias control. Obviously, over-biasing will give you boomier, more low-end sounds going this direction, and as you dial it back this way, you get into kind of dead battery, Velcro-y textures, very kind of starved circuit fuzz sounds, which plays in really, really smoothly with the dynamics of this gate control, where at really high levels, you're letting the maximum amount of fuzz through the gate, but also kind of creates more ripping textures as well. And weirdly, going the opposite direction, bringing the gate really far down, gets you into treble boosting territory that keeps more low end out. So let's take them back to noon and noon, give that a listen really quick, and then let's go to one of my favorite kind of go-to sounds in this thing. As you can hear, there is a little bit of that grippy, Velcro-y texture in that fuzz. But if we take the gate all the way down and we take the bias all the way up, we get into a really cool, kind of treble boostery, very gritty, but in a very articulate way. Something that cleans up really well is a good way of putting it. And you may be noticing more sustain as well as more low end as that gate moves up. And of course, bias is also not a min to max kind of thing where ideal bias is at the top and it just starves as you roll back, but instead it's more of a over bias to under bias relationship. So if we take this back to about here, you can hear the relationship with that gate really coming into high relief. Let's take that gate back to about noon, because obviously if we take it all the way back down, we start to starve the circuit out too much with its relationship with that gate, because you get more gated textures at maximum, but you also get less of the signal passing through the gate at maximum. So let's take our gate back up to a nice comfortable middle, and we'll adjust and fine tune as we roll this bias back. There is everything from ratty, scrappy treble booster textures all the way up through really woolly, doomy fuzz sounds, especially as you kind of max those things up. And now we can take a look at that echo. A thing worth noting as we kind of get into this is, one, there's always a little bit of noise in this pedal. We've discussed that already. And two, it's worth noting and reiterating that that fuzz is, or that echo is never really fully not there, even when you have the mix at minimum like we do right now. If you max out that feedback, it's always there, which is why, to isolate it as best as possible, we have the mix at minimum, and I have all of these settings for that fuzz, or for that echo at minimum right now. But we're going to use it now, so let's go ahead and take all echo knobs to noon. mix, of course, does not go full wet. But because of the relationship between the delay and the guitar both going into the front of the fuzz circuit on this thing, you can really drive that fuzz hard even when you have it set up pretty clean, because ultimately the fuzz is going to react to the amount of volume coming into it. So if we've got our super squeaky clean, or as clean as it gets guitar, and we bring the delay to match, it'll get about the same. But as you push that delay into the extremes and start pushing it louder than the guitar itself, you really start to drive the fuzz harder with the echo than you do the guitar, which we are going to like long examples right now to kind of showcase that, just to kind of demonstrate the effect that it has. But you can take that to a more slapbacky kind of place. And really hear the difference between a subtle all the way up to a cool if you really want to mangle that stuff. Let's go ahead, and obviously you can hear the point at which this oscillates kind of varies on where all of the settings are. Very similar to Benson's delay, their kind of full-featured dedicated delay. You do have different oscillation points based on different sets of controls across the PT2399 chipset that he's using. Okay, let's bring that delay a little bit lower and start properly mangling it. So a great example here is the fact that you can take a relatively short delay and really bolster single note fuzz runs that are already very full bodied. because that gate offers a lot of additional compression to the signal, even when things are oscillating. Let's go ahead and push into oscillation territory to demonstrate this point. As we walk into some of these crazier fuzz sounds and everything, a thing I want to highlight is the relationship between this gate control and the ability to override kind of oscillation on the Fuzz Echo in a really interesting way. So if we go ahead and push this into full oscillation, because we are not gating, because we are not offering that compression and that smash that comes from hitting the front of that gate, because the gate is effectively quote unquote off in this context, you can't really stand up above that feedback except by taking it as low as you can in the mix. Just a fun consequence of the relationship between delay in front of fuzz with these gate controls. Let's go ahead and keep walking through this. Another fun use case for this really bizarre relationship between the chaotic aspects of the very kind of gated, messed up, broken fuzz sounds and the fuzz, or in the echo. With the added benefit of, because this can push past unity gain, you can create these really like edge of not even working textures. And then recreate a very weird version of them. There's a lot of stuff that is very, very kind of like beneficial to have just in terms of a single repeat behind you, whether it's very slapbacky. Especially for stuff like octaves and single note bends. So let's take the levels, the subtlety there is really, really like potent. And then as you kind of run up the number of repeats, you just get a little bit more of an exaggerated version of that. Which, of course, as we all know, leads directly to very My Bloody Valentine sounds. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. And my question to you for this one is, where is your read on specificity versus mass appeal for gear? Would you rather have a device that can really kind of cover every possible contingency and use case for fuzz or for delay or for reverb or whatever? Or are you somebody who finds that creativity can be more well nurtured with constraints? Let me know in those comments down below. I would love to hear from you. I will see you in the next one.